as a distinguished panel, each of whom they will introduce themselves and they will share congratulatory remarks on Dr. Thomson's very first publication. So we invite everyone to come on in. If you're joining us via Facebook Live, we are live on Dr. Thomson's page, as well as the Q95 Facebook page, DNO Facebook page, TDN Radio, as well as Push Past 10. We are also live on tdntv.net, as well as Q95 Radio, TDN Radio, and DNO website. So we are everywhere because this is a celebration. It is a celebration of Dr. Thomson's work as he tells us the story of the fighting spirits of the Maroons of Dominica. And it is a wonderful day because he will present the information. It is one of us telling our stories. So we can see on Facebook that we have a number of people joining the live. So we encourage you, of course, to share the live. And if you're listening via the radio, if you're listening on DNO, if you're listening on Q95, the big station, we invite you to send a WhatsApp, send a message, send an email, send a smoke signal, send whatever you can to invite everyone to come in and to join us. So without any further ado, let us welcome the man of the hour, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, as he introduces himself, and this will be followed by the introduction of the rest of the panel. Dr. Fontaine, it is wonderful to be here with you today.
Well, Simon, let me thank you. Indeed, it is my pleasure, and let me say a very special welcome to our special invited guests that are joining us tonight on this program. As we go through, of course, the introductions will be made. Let me also say a very special welcome to the scores of fans and well-wishers who are joining us from across the globe at this time on Facebook Live and the different media, TDN TV, Q Radio, FM, TDN Radio, and other outlets, DNO as well. It is good to have all of you, and I'm excited about this time. It's a time which I hoped and prayed would come, and it is here tonight. And so I'm really delighted to be a part of this activity, and I'm looking forward very much to the discussion.
Yes, absolutely. So let's just go around the panel and introduce who's joining us to congratulate Dr. Thomson today. And we will start with you, Dr. Irvin Andre. Unmute your mic, please.
All right, wonderful. Good afternoon to our esteemed panelists, Dr. Fontaine. Let me wish you some special congratulations on this wonderful occasion. And obviously a pleasant good afternoon to the large number of listeners of Q95. And also last but not least, let me again thank Mr. G for using his considerable resources and putting it at the assistance of the poor. I think we will be enriched today with this exposure. And I look forward to giving my 2 cents worth. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Andre. Mr. Sam George, you're up next.
Well, yes, good evening to the panel. Of course, good evening to you, Dr. Fontaine. As always, good to see you. And my name is Sam George, and Dr. Fontaine and I work closely together as part owners or co-owners of TDN Network. And, you know, it's been something I have wanting to see him do for a while, you know, publish something. And so far, I must say I am very, very pleased with what he has published for his first time out. So congratulations again.
Yes, absolutely. And the introductions continue with Dr. Neil Vaz. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Dr. Neil Vaz, and I actually wrote my dissertation on Dominica's Maroon community. So I'm really excited to hear what Dr. Fontaine has to say and hear more about his work. Thank you.
Yes, and a man who needs absolutely no introduction, Mr. Loftus-Durand, you want to chime in?
Well, I just want to say good afternoon. I'm at Master Controls. We'll be taking in the calls at about 4:20 thereabout when Dr. Thomson Fontaine gives that green light.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Gabriel Christian?
A pleasant good afternoon to everyone, to the owner of Q95 and his outstanding staff. Thank you very much, Ms. Matthew, for having me. Brother T, or I say TF, in short form, that's why I've called Thomson that for very many years. Memory brings me back to the early days when I saw Thomson with a knapsack that was almost as big as he was when he was in 6B at the Sixth Form College. I was a first year assistant teacher at the DGS, and Thomson, you've done it. I'm very happy to be on this distinguished panel with distinguished scholars and thinkers, all of whom will contribute, but what you've done is outstanding, and we are here to celebrate this moment where one of our own have spoken to our victory struggle for liberty, and may it ever be thus, that we never surrender in that process. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes, and we're moving along to Dr. Dale Dangleben.
It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here to celebrate Dr. Fontaine's moment. Dr. Fontaine was my history teacher in third form many moons ago. So this is great. I call it full circle from a Eurocentric standpoint to self-discovery. So I'm looking forward to be part of this great panel.
Yes, absolutely. And would Mr. G like to say a word as well?
Thanks a lot, Mon. Just to really congratulate Dr. Thomson Fontaine. I mean, obviously, it is not anything unusual to hear Dr. Thomson Fontaine is doing. First, he's always doing something, always on the front line, doing something creative. And Dominica is so blessed to have a son of the soil like Dr. Thomson Fontaine. It's just unfortunate that other countries have taken so much advantage of him and his talent, and we are not able to get all of it now, but I mean, be that as it may, look at what he's doing from wherever he is, always thinking about Dominica. And I'm just simply delighted to be here and to be part of this illustrious panel. Dr. Dale Dangleben, how are you, sir? We have not spoken for quite a while. It's very good to have you here with us this evening. And thanks for giving me a moment to speak, Simone. Thanks a lot.
Yes, so again, if you're just joining us, we are here for the grand launching of Dr. Thomson Fontaine's new publication, which, by the way, has already climbed to the status of bestseller. So we have to congratulate him on so many levels. And again, the name of the book is The Maroons of Dominica, 1764 to 1818. And with regards to the order of the program, what I would like to do today is essentially focus a lot of the questions and the conversation to Dr. Fontaine, since he's the author, but I welcome the rest of the panel to chime in as we go along with any contributions that you would be interested in offering. And of course, if you're joining us on Facebook, we also welcome your contributions. And as Lofty reminded us, you will also be able to make a contribution via the radio. So at about 4:20 p.m., you will be able to join in on the conversation with regards to any questions that you may have, or if you just want to say congratulations. So Dr. Fontaine, again, congratulations on this very important piece of work that you've created. And by way of beginning the conversation, I was just wondering, did your interest in this particular topic begin? Because as we know, Bala, one of the great chief of the Maroons, he was actually from Grand Forks, which is where you come from. And we also know that your family has a very special connection to the Rosalie estate. So kind of just tell us, where did your initial interest in this particular topic begin? You're muted.
Yes, Simon, thanks very much for this. And indeed, you know, that's a great way to start, because it goes back really to my childhood. And growing up in Grand Forks, growing up basically in the shadow of the Rosalie estate. My parents went to school and to church. I remember as a kid, for example, having to make the 2-mile walk every Sunday with my mom and my siblings to attend church on the Rosalie estate. And therefore, obviously, most of the inhabitants of Grand Forks were either enslaved or workers on the Rosalie estate. And then when the last white plantation owner to come he kind of drove them away, and they moved to, some moved to Grand Fond, some moved to Rivière-Syriac and to Montjean. So we're really, our descendants are really part of the history of this estate. So I grew up knowing about the Maroon movement. But interestingly enough, and always wanting to, I always told myself that there would come a day when I would be writing the story of the Maroons of Dominica. I knew of Bala, but I never knew of his exploits until about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was listening to a lecture by Dr. Edward Scobie, and he mentioned the exploits of Bala, and I was like, what? Nobody had never told me that. I never knew this. And I vowed at this time to find out more and to tell the story of Bala, to tell the story of the Maroons in a way that the history would come alive to the people of Dominica. And so it has been a 4-year odyssey, a 4-year journey of doing the research, finding out where the information is. And I'll tell you what really got me fired up, really got me to this book. I was doing another project on another area, and somehow the photo of the Maroons came to mind. And I was researching some old newspapers in the UK online, and the thought just occurred to me to put in the name of Bala out of the blue, just put in the name of Bala as a search term. And I typed in Bala, and to my complete surprise, I saw all of these hits. It was, the computer was working and working. And when it settled, there were hundreds of references. I was like, what? You know, so that drew my attention to the point I said, no, this story, I don't think Dominica knows of the story of this great man. I don't think we've done enough to put the story out there. And so it was just a matter of getting the information, doing the research, and coming up with what we know are the Maroons of Dominica.
Yes, fascinating. And you would think with the amount of information you were able to acquire, that more would have been known about the Maroons of Dominica and all that they contributed to finally ending the slave trade, even within the Caribbean. So you talked about a little bit about the research that you did, but just kind of walk us through the research process. Where did you begin? And take us on the journey of actually discovering all that you did in the process.
Yes, so a lot of the work had to do with basically getting some of these quotations, and a lot, for those of you that read the book, you will see those quotations. For example, a lot of the communications between the colonial administration in Dominica and the UK authorities is in Kew Gardens, London, at the National Heritage Site, where you have all of these documents that really tell a story about Dominica, the colonial history of Dominica. It is there in letters, it is there in different correspondences, all of that archived at the National Archives. And so it was a matter of digging through those. It was also, as I said, going online through the newspapers. I was very fortunate. I got several newspaper articles dating back to the period I started in 1764. From that period onwards, a number of newspapers, not only in the United Kingdom, but also in the US at the time, the 13 states that made up the United States. And so all of that information, along with the work, I must give a lot of credit as well to individuals, one of the individuals who is here with us as well, Dr. Neil Vaz, who did some very good research on the Maroons of Dominica. I was able to benefit from that. Also benefited from the work that was done by Dr. Lennox Hornchurch, who has written about the Dominican Maroons. I was also able to benefit from the work of Paulie Patillo, who did a very good and detailed analysis of the Maroon trials of 1813 and 1814 that is highlighted in the book as well. So all of these different individuals who had written before, and I also got a very good piece of work from a gentleman by the name of Simon Grell. I believe he is now a lecturer at the State College. He did his master's dissertation on the Maroons in 1976 in Canada. And I was able to find that online. So you had all of these bits and pieces that were everywhere. I was able to tie together into what is really a fascinating story, and a story that all of Dominica must know and must find out about.
Yeah, certainly. So since we have Dr. Neil Vaz on the live with us, I would like for him to chime in as well and just tell us about the importance of the research that he did with regards to the Maroons of Dominica and how he was able to connect with Dr. Fontaine on the topic.
Well, I was a graduate student at Howard University, and I remember thinking I wanted to write on a subject that was not covered too much, but at the same time, I guess exhibited some of the characteristics of a freedom-fighting group of people, right? So, you know, Jamaica. A lot of graduate students were doing their research on Jamaica, Maroons, or Jamaican resistance, or even a lot of historians in the past have already done that. So, I was really looking at some of the islands in the Lesser Antilles, and so my mom is from Grenada, and I was looking into some of the Grenadian resistance. But something about the Grenadian resistance didn't quite sit well totally with me, because when you're talking about Grenadian resistance, like for instance, Julian Fedon in the 1795 rebellion, there was a lot of French influence there with that rebellion. I started looking more into other parts of the Lesser Antilles, and then when I stumbled upon Dominica and started looking at some of the secondary sources, I can see that there were a lot of African names. Right? Like Bala, I learned was an African, it's a Mandinka name. Congo Ray, you know, Mumbai, all these names, they sound like they had some type of Bantu African ring to it. So I was really interested in not only freedom fighting of people of African descent, but just what kind of African philosophical underpinnings they brought with them in these resistance movements, right? Sometimes we have a tendency to attribute the success of a revolution, or even a rebellion itself, to the French influence or to some type of European influence. But I started to see, when I started digging a little bit deeper and looking at some of the primary sources, that there was actually a lot of African philosophical influence in what inspired these Africans to rise up and rebel through time. So I started doing more and more research. I, got some grants and stuff, and I went to London. I went to France. I went to Dominica, and I started gathering a lot of information on the subject, and then started reading through the secondary sources as well. And I started writing my dissertation. Say it again. So I started getting a lot of information on the subject, and I wrote my dissertation. And when you're writing your dissertation, you're just at a certain point, you're just trying to get it done, right? And so I wrote it. I was inspired writing it, but by the time I got towards the end, I was just like, I got to get this thing done, because there's so much more information that I could have added to it. So when I finally got it done, put it out there, graduated, I would get these like emails every now and then, or these calls every now and then from people that are actually reading it. Mm-hmm. So it actually is a good feeling to know that. And so Gabriel Christian is one of those that he actually called me one day, and he said he was really fascinated with the dissertation, and he wanted to know, a lot more about it. And he wanted to schedule a meeting with me and some others that are here on this panel as well. And so that's how I met Dr. Fontaine, was through Gabriel Christian. And we had a deep conversation on a panel. I think it was right around the Dominica's independence anniversary, November 3rd, right around there. And it was real nice.
Yeah, well, thank you for your contribution to our specific history in Dominica, Dr. Vaz. So Dr. Fontaine, back to you. And as someone who's read this book from cover to cover, I have to tell you what I truly appreciated was how you were able to provide the first-hand accounts as it related to hearing the final words of Bala. How did that resonate with you in particular, to be able to hear and read and see the words come to life of a historic character that we knew such a little bit about, such as Bala?
I tell you, the first time I read it, I am having the same reaction now.
Yes, Shivas. I got shivers too.
Absolute shivers, because it's almost like over 200 years, there was his words lifted out of the archives. And in my ear, and I could picture, I could see the man, I could see the person, I could see, you know, this fighter for freedom who had dared to stand against the white plantation system, who had decided that he would not spend not one single day on the estate, who, because of his thoughts, was determined to fight the system. And there he was on his dying bed. The gentleman who had shot him was writing and relaying the story to the governor as exactly what transpired and what Bala said. And to hear his words and to hear what he called for, which I'm not going to say now, I would like our listeners to really get the book, as they say, get the book to get those words. But it is something that even now, it brings shivers because it is so powerful in terms of what this gentleman represented, what he was to the movement, because up to this point, he was referred to as the chief of chiefs. In other words, the way the Maroons were organized is along this system in Africa, where you had a system of chiefs. He was considered to be the chief of chiefs, the biggest among the undisputed chief of the Maroons. And so when he died, it was quite an activity. And a number of the Maroons throughout Dominica, several days of mourning, people were distraught, people were beyond themselves when Bala died. But his words is just something to remember.
Yes, absolutely. So it's truly a gem to be able to read those words out of the book. Now, we have quite a bit to cover, but again, if you're just joining us, we are here live on Facebook and through several mediums, including Q95 Radio, TDN Radio, and a variety of other sources, celebrating the launch of Dr. Thomson's best-selling book, The Maroons of Dominica, 1764 to 1818. So, Dr. Fontaine, we have a lot to cover, but I wanted to ask you about the writing process. Because as someone who has published a book as well, it always feels like you're heading in a particular direction and then somehow you get pulled or attracted to something important. Did you have any discoveries along the way that kind of pulled you off to the side for a moment?
Oh, absolutely. And the one that jumps most readily to mind is the role of the Maroons played in actually ending the slave trade first, and then the slavery. That is something that very few of us knew. I personally did not know about it until I began the research. And when I came upon an article where that very day that Sir William Wilberforce rose to address the British Parliament in 1787 to launch the whole idea of abolition of the slave trade, he made mention of Dominica. He did not talk about Jamaica or Barbados or any of the other islands. It was Dominica, because the activities of the Maroons in what it was then referred to as the First Maroon War of 1785-1786 was uppermost in the mind of the British public. And by referencing Dominica, he could pull together to the public exactly what was going on. And bear in mind, Dominica's slavery was a lot later. By the time slavery was established in Dominica in 1764, when the British actually took possession of Dominica and began to bring in slaves in large numbers, countries like Barbados and Jamaica were already well established. They had a system of slavery for over 100 years already. Slavery was started in Jamaica in 1527. So over 100 years, there was slavery in the Caribbean, but not in Dominica. Dominica was a free country.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, Dr. Thomson, because one of the things I found truly fascinating was that there was 100 years of neutrality where islands like Dominica and St. Vincent were absolutely not involved in any form with slavery. That's something I did not know. So that was surprising to me.
Yeah, and it was mainly because of the Kalinagos. We had the Kalinagos in numbers on Dominica and St. Vincent. Later on, the St. Vincent Kalinagos became known as the Black Caribs. And I thought that was something of folklore, but it is there in the newspapers with the shipwreck of a boatload of slaves, of African slaves that was coming to the West Indies, and the boat got shipwrecked. on St. Vincent. Those slaves escaped into the island. They were taken in by the Kalinagos there, by the Caribs in St. Vincent, and they later intermarried, and they started a whole new generation of Black Caribs. And that is all there in the accounts of the day, of the newspapers of the day. So it is not a myth. It is something that happened at the time and was chronicled. And so the fact that Dominica and St. Vincent were the only two countries to be free had a lot to do with the Kalinagos, another brave heritage of ours in Dominica.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think the readers will get so much value out of this book because it is supposed to be a historic account, but I think Sam George, who is with us today, said it best when he was interviewing you. It reads like a movie. So I was telling you when we spoke that I had a difficult time putting down the book because it was so captivating that you set up the scenery from when Columbus first saw Dominica to the luscious mountains and the beautiful valleys of Dominica. Do you think that the terrain of Dominica was the primary reason that these Maroons were able to evade captivity for this long? And we also see that the terrain was so important in just their ability to be able to thrive and create their own communities. So let's just kind of talk about the terrain of Dominica and how it contributed to the success of the Maroons.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the terrain of Dominica was so inaccessible to the whites. I mean, they had some really difficult times tracking down the Maroons. It's much later when slaves began to sell out their brothers and sisters that they began to register some success. But initially it was extremely difficult. And you know how they were able to hide themselves in very wonderful places like Mont de Moulin, like up by Brewery Lake area, in the heights of Grand Fond, in the heights of Layou, for example, different areas that were really inaccessible. And so that made a huge difference, the ability to actually stay hidden. In fact, when the real onslaught started against the Maroons, they found young people in their 20s and 30s who had never set eyes on a white man.
Yes,
all they knew were the forests of Dominica. They were able to build those communities and remain there, undetected for a very, very long time. So that played a very critical role. For example, I don't think that you could have the same success, say, in Barbados with their type of Antigua or St. Kitts for that matter. So definitely that played a huge role, and it really provided a safe haven, for the Maroons and for the people who wanted to resist slavery.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, speaking of what the readers can expect as well, I think one of the things that resonated with me and really captivated my attention was to be able to read about these familiar places like Layou and Kashaku and Portsmouth and Grand Bay, and knowing that I've been to these places and I'm from this island. So to be able to read accounts from all the way back in the 1700s and the 1800s and to recognize the names, and not only the names of the places, but the names of the people as well, such as Sorrento and surprisingly Skerrit. That was a surprise. So were you surprised when you found those names as well?
I found this to be very interesting because it actually gives you a good snapshot in terms of who owned slaves, including, by the way, a number of the mulattoes. All right, a number of mulattoes actually owned slaves. That was the offspring of usually the white class and the slave women, and but they ended up owning slaves, and they would have the last name of their fathers, and so it's very easy in the book to see exactly which families own slaves and who did not. It's fascinating, and then there's also this story of Savre, for example.
Yes.
The direct descendant is the president of Dominica, Charles Angelo Savre. He's in fact I believe it was his great grandfather or great-great-grand, who was in fact the one who led the unrelenting attack together, and we'll talk about that later, with Governor Hensley against the Maroons of Dominica, and was responsible himself, as you can see in the archives that we have at the end of the book, was responsible himself for killing several of them and capturing several of them. So it's a very interesting read of our history and the kinds of characters that were involved.
Yeah, and on this question, I would like for the panel who's with us today to join in. So of course, we know this is a historic account, but I was just wondering while reading the book, Thomson, what was it about our particular ancestors that caused them to be so rebellious and so forthright with fighting being captive? And I was just wondering, do you believe it was because of who they were in Africa? And of course, we're not going to give away the story, but in your view, do you think that it was because of who, especially Jacko and Bala, who they were back in Africa?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. These were leaders in the country, and one of the things that you will find and read in the book is that a number of those slaves were not ordinary men and women. They were not ordinary people. They really went for the creme de la creme of African society. You know, real top people in that country. And that is the reason why these individuals came with that mindset. So for example, Jacko decided he would not spend one day on an estate, and he did not. I speak in the book as well in the forward about the two princes of Calabar, Robin John and Amanda Robin John. And these two individuals, I talked about them because it shows how the whole thing unfolded in terms of approaching royalty, bringing in royalty into Dominica, and how the mindset was such that they would not succumb. They were taken usually by trickery, they were taken by force, they were taken under dubious means and brought to the West Indies. But at the end of the day, they resisted from the very beginning. And I think that helped a lot in terms of bringing this. And I'll just say there, as we open up for the rest of the panel, that, you know, we grew up knowing so much about the Maroons of Jamaica. But the Maroons of Jamaica, and that's the other thing that is made very clear in this, and it's not my words, but I got the words of a member of parliament, MP Heron, I can't remember his first name now, but he said something which is very important in discussing Dominica before the British Parliament. He said that the Maroons of Dominica were not like the Maroons of Jamaica.
He did.
He did say that the Maroons of Jamaica, they basically gave themselves up. They signed treaties with the UK, they signed treaties with their oppressors, and they were largely done away with. Not so with the Dominican Maroons. The Dominican Maroons refused to sign any treaty with the British. They refused to sign treaty. And he said what they focused on was really the destruction of the plantation system. And his words are there for us to read and to understand the fear and the apprehension that the Maroons of Dominica brought to the plantation system. And just to give one final word on Bala, right after Bala attacked the Rosalie estate, the whole of Roseau was up in arms because they feared, and the rumor was that Bala was marching into town to get them. And as many whites as possible that could left Dominica at that time. So, you know, you see that it's a different mindset that kind of led the Maroons of Dominica. And that is something that I don't think our history has really taught us. And that is one of the things I'm really proud about in the book, that's able to bring out the mindset of the Maroons of Dominica, their fierce resistance to slavery, and above all, their desire not to be enslaved, but to live as free people in the forest.
Yes, and just one other point before we turn it over to the panel, Dr. Fontaine, is just to see that mentality existed wherever they roamed, because you gave a great account of one particular Maroon who was banished to St. Kitts, and he landed and he took flight and started the same mentality that he will not be captured, he will not be enslaved. So I just found it fascinating that even when they were removed from Dominica, they carried the mentality with them.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, I will tell you this, the people or the slave owners in the neighboring countries, they were very much in fear. And they were saying, please don't send them, because it got to the point where they were banishing the Maroons to neighboring countries. And they would say, no, we don't want them, because they would come and it's the same trouble. And you talked about this particular instance. I got a very interesting article in one of the newspapers about a Dominican Maroon who had arrived just 2 days, and the kind of mayhem that he caused in St. Kitts. But again, I'll leave that up for you to read in the book. It's all there.
Absolutely. So let's take our question to the panel and this particular question. But in your knowledge of the Maroons of Dominica, what are some of the attributes you think were specific to them that caused them to be so revolutionary? So any characteristics that come to mind with regards to the Maroons of Dominica that fortified them in the role that they played in our history? So anyone on the panel can join in.
Can I say this? I just want to read a piece out of the book that Dr. Fontaine did, because I think it speaks to the question that you just asked. And before doing that, I just want to say I sort of struggled with the title to that review that I did in that book. I wanted a title that was reflective of the irrepressible determination to have liberty that the Dominican Maroons possessed. And so I could find no other appropriate title than the one that I chose, Live Free or Die. And the Edinburgh Advertiser of 1785 stated, and I quote, "They, the Maroons, have taken different positions in this mountainous, strong country, have formed separate encampments and elected chiefs, and from thence send out small parties who have attacked the estates, drove away the cattle, and done every mischief in their power." That to me encapsulated, I see Dr. Vaz, who will chime in, is shaking his head, the irrepressible commitment to liberty. They were not satisfied, as the Jamaican Maroons were, to sign a treaty and go to cockpit country and chill out. They fought bravely, and they fought till the end. And that is the message for Dominicans today. And that is the message for Black people all over the world today, that do not allow ourselves to become captives to tyrants or to tyranny or tyrannical systems of governance. Slavery was wrong. And by their commitment to live free or die, they ensured the freedoms that we enjoy today. And let us never give up those freedoms or give up that nation whose very soil was soaked with their precious blood. And I will conclude by saying, Dr. Vaz captured it best when he spoke to the spiritual element of the Dominican Maroons. They preferred to give up their lives than to live in chains. And it's that spiritual consciousness that reminds me of how, in some strange way, we see the connectivity between some names in that book, like Savre, who was one of the traitors who helped to kill that Maroon leader. I think it was Jacko, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Fontaine?
Correct, Jacko, yes.
All right, and I won't say any more on that. I'll leave it up to the imagination of your listeners. But this is a powerful book of the spiritual commitment to freedom. And we just want to thank you for it. I'll conclude by saying we expect to be joined by a Maroon leader, not of course an original, from Colombia, Professor Caicedo. He's trying to join, and when the host sees him out there, he wanted to send greetings because he lives in a Maroon settlement outside the city of Cali. I've been there with him. One of the first free Maroon settlements on the continent was in Colombia, and several of them still exist. Thank you very much, Simon.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else? George, Sam?
Yeah, let me start by saying that to readers, especially our fellow Dominicans, that you need to read this book. Thomson, you kind of mentioned it a while ago, and one of the things I found interesting is the two brothers. I don't want to give it away, so I'll just say the two brothers who, upon landing in Dominica, decided we ain't going to be slaves, and they escaped all the way to England until they made their way back home to Africa.
Yes.
I think that in itself is an important story, or an important part of the story because not everyone could stay and fight. You know, some people felt like they needed to make it back home, and I'm sure there were others who tried and failed, but yet I think their story is important as well. And of course, you know, we can also enjoy the stories of the battles, you know, that the Maroons fought. Especially one I found very interesting is in the beginning when you talk about the Revolt and the First Maroon War. You know, they had strategy. They laid in wait, you know, for what was his name, McBean. And so,
Yes.
you know, I think that was a very fascinating story. And not only, it's not just a story, it's history. And so, you know, I'll end by saying that you know, I hope the Ministry of Education in Dominica picks up this book and decides that it needs to be part of, you know, every history class from elementary school all the way to the state college, because I think it'll play an important role in educating our people about our history. I'm sure you guys agree.
Yeah, certainly. Anyone else?
I do agree 100% with the curriculum, not just Dominica. This is Caribbean. You know, I really want to jump in because I know I spoke to Dr. Fontaine maybe over a year ago when he mentioned, you know, working on his book. So I know the research that he put into it and the accuracy. He was telling me about all the stuff that he found and things like that. But I want to speak not just on the story, but the impact of what this book should have today on us as a people. And that's where we need to focus, right?
Absolutely.
So it's interesting how we make the connection between the sovereigns and the Skerrits in the book. So history does repeat itself sometimes if we drop the ball and we turn the other way, right? And we talk about modern day. I've been screaming this for 5 years. I started a brand called the Neg Maroon, right? So I'm happy that my former history teacher, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, has written this book, and he's telling you himself, even as a former history teacher, how much he discovered doing this research. So here we were in the Caribbean being fed this Eurocentric stuff. I wanted to be Drake on the high seas and Hawkins and Cortez and Bobadilla, right? But now we're open. Our mind is open. And Thomson is enlightening us even further. I mean, I haven't started. I promised him I would finish it by the weekend, but I am going to read it. But the whole point of this is our time. This is our time to change our future and finally understand our past. You see what I mean? Because that makes a huge difference in the mindset of children. And the next generation, these books is what we need. So I want to thank Dr. Fontaine for this great work. And I know the ancestors are proud. Because when we talk about who we are as a people, we got to uplift the ancestry. I do not walk in the light of Hawkins and Drake and all these other folks. I walk in the spirit of our ancestors, the Africans, the Neg Maroon, the Balas, the Congolese. And so I'm very, very proud of this moment.
Yes, and before anyone else chimes in, I just want to reiterate what Dr. Dangaben said, that a lot of this information in the past have been presented from a Eurocentric perspective, but now to have it presented by an ancestor, a descendant of these great men, I think it sort of puts it into perspective for the rest of us who are descendants of these great warriors. Dr. Irvin, you wanted to chime in?
Yes, indeed, and I thank you for that, and I thank the panelists for their wonderful contributions to this narrative. What I'm going to do perhaps is slightly different. I'm going to try to situate this book within the history of slavery as manifested over a number of decades and put Thomson within a continuum of that history. For many decades prior to 1944, the British historians, they waxed poetic. They hugged each other by proclaiming that the ending of slavery was the proud end product of British humanitarianism. That is to say, it was the product of their love of humanity. Now in 1944, 43, 44, Eric Williams, as most of us know, in his doctoral thesis called Capitalism and Slavery, reversed that self-serving perception or view as to the end of slavery by saying that nonsense. What caused you to abolish, to emancipate the slaves is that one, at that time in the early 19th century, slavery was becoming unproductive. But not only that, slavery was inimical to capitalist society, because you have these hundreds of thousands of Black potential buyers of British products caught in bondage. You have to free their buying power, their spirit. So Eric Williams overturned the whole thesis on its head and indicated essentially that it was self-serving financial self-interest which caused the British to end slavery. After all, in fast forward to on about 1977, as I said, Eric Williams for decades was a thorn in the side of the British intellectual tradition about the end of slavery. There's a famous study, a famous book by an American historian called Seymour Drescher. He wrote a book called Econocide. And in that book, he said Eric Williams was wrong. The British historians hugged him as if he was the second coming of Jesus Christ. They said that they're happy to see that Seymour Drescher has set aside, has cast the demons of self-interest aside, has set aside, has proven Eric Williams to be wrong. What does Seymour Drescher say? He said that on the contrary, slavery was very productive when in fact it was abolished on about 1834. Now the fundamental question is this: he didn't have much to say about slave rebellion. He said nothing about it. So Seymour Drescher continued in the best traditions of British paternalism by saying that no, slavery was very profitable. Therefore, there had to be a humanitarian aspect to the abolition of slavery in 1834. But in the last few decades, West Indian historians, African historians have started to reinterpret this history. Dr. Dale Bangerman made mention of the Eurocentric emphasis and preoccupation with what is best in the British character or psyche. In 1982, there was a Michael Crichton wrote a book called Testing the Chains: Resistance to Slavery in the British West Indies. And he started to focus on the indigenous actions of slaves in the islands, in Jamaica, in Barbados, which from his perspective precipitated the downfall of slavery. And it is that re-emphasis and re-focus on the indigenous efforts to cast aside this yoke of domination that we have to view Thomson Fontaine's wonderful contribution. Because hitherto, and let me parenthetically say that Dr. Honeychurch has also written a book about the Maroons and their efforts to free themselves from the yoke of thraldom. There's been a number of efforts in Dominica itself to focus on the institution of slavery and its impact on us. Bernard Wiltshire has written a fair amount and has been a great advocate for the cause of accepting that aspect of our history. There's an American historian called Roger Buckley. A few years ago, he wrote a book called Slaves in Red Coats. He talked about the British West Indian Regiment in Dominica on about 1801, 1802, and their rebellion at the Cabrits because of a concern that they would be put back into slavery. One of the interesting things of that book was that, and it echoes some of the things that Thompson has said, Gabriel and Dr. Dale, and even Dr. George, that rather than being captured by the white militias, they threw themselves down the Cabrits. They threw themselves rather than, as I said, be captured and subjected to the brutality which has been exhibited so much throughout the British history in the islands. The whole question of slavery again has been has been propagated, has been cultivated, in my view, by Dominican writers. Farcelle, the book of fiction written by Alec Lozat. The novel Unburnable, again, speaks to the proud traditions of these Maroons who established their own societies within the interior of Dominica. It appears that Thomson has given a wonderful side to this history, which cries to be documented. And it seems to me that Thomson has made a Herculean effort to do precisely that. I can indicate to you that some time ago, I was having nothing else to do. I was also looking at the British newspapers, the archives. And I learned that in 1813, a Shakespearean scholar wrote a book, a Shakespearean play based on the Caribs. In 1851, a former naval officer, the British Army, who visited Dominica with his regiment, wrote a 3-volume novel based, at least part of it is based on Dominica, detailing the work, the people, the slaves, and so on and so forth. So this book gives us, in my respectful view, it gives us an avenue. It gives us almost like a platform to take off into even further scrutiny of that aspect of our history. It gives us an opportunity to repatriate our history. It gives us an opportunity to have a better understanding of where we are today. It gives us an avenue to show that to some extent or to a significant extent, how those values, those communal values, which caused people like Bala, Jacko, Farcelle and company, Congore, to even dream. They had the audacity to dream, and not only to dream, but to set up establishments within Dominica's impenetrable interior. And you juxtapose that to where we are today, and hopefully an understanding of what happened in the past can inform us as to just how far we've fallen today, and hopefully to give us the imperative and the incentive to hopefully change for the better today. If history doesn't teach us anything, then history is actually nothing. So, Thomson, wonderful work. I certainly look forward to reading it. And I hope all Dominicans, not just Dominicans for God's sakes, but all persons who are descendants of slaves, persons who ache for a better understanding, persons who have the audacity to hope, but not just to hope, to act, to achieve a better future. I hope this is the final encouragement that they need. So thank you once again.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Andre, for your contribution. And of course, we invite anybody else from the panel who would like to make a contribution as well. But we just want to acknowledge everyone who's joining us via Facebook Live, and to let you know that we will be taking your questions and your comments about the half-an-hour mark after 4:30. And again, if you're listening to us via Q95, you will be able to call in at about 4:20 with your questions, or if you just want to simply say congratulations to Dr. Fontaine. So the next thing I want us to look at are the major battles that the Maroons faced during their time in Dominica. But I wanted to give one last opportunity if anybody else wanted to make a contribution before we move on.
Yes, Dr. Matthew, if we wanted to, I just wanted to, because it took a while for him to get in. Professor Caicedo, are you online? Can you bring us greetings from Colombia, from the Palenque?
Yes, I definitely. Greetings. Let me just, yes, greetings from, our brothers and sisters in Colombia and South America. It is truly an honor to be, invited to this event. I give thanks to, my good brother, Attorney Christian, for the invitation. He's actually the first person from Dominica I got to meet. So it is because of him that I'm here. So I bring a lot of love and respect from, your brothers and sisters in South America, and I give much respect to each and every one on the panel, and I give thanks once again for the invitation. Bless.
Professor, before you go, can you, because Dr. Fontaine has done this work, which informs the world of what happened in Dominica, which is similar to what happened in your neck of the woods with the Cimarron. The Maroon word in Spanish is Cimarron. Can you just tell us the importance of this history of Dominica's Maroons, as Dr. Fontaine has explained, as we've all spoken to, for the people in Colombia who went through the same process?
Well, when you study history, especially the history of enslaved Africans in the Americas, you get to see that there were a lot of Maroon communities basically everywhere, not just in the Caribbean, but you had, Maroon communities in Colombia, you have Maroon communities in Ecuador, you have Maroon communities. Even in Argentina, we just don't know much about these communities. So when you get to study, as I said before, the history of, African liberation throughout the country, you get to learn more and see more and connect the dots. Because if you have like Maroon heroes in Jamaica, if you have Maroon heroes in Dominica, you get to see that there are a lot of Maroon heroes everywhere. Like whether you call it Maroon communities or quilombolas or comunidades cimarronas in Spanish are basically the same. So it is about time that we get to link up and study our history as a whole, get to connect the dots and just link up and move forward. That's my message on this particular issue.
So basically, Dr. Fontaine is appointed me to say to you that you're going to help us with the first International Congress of Maroon Communities in the Americas.
Wow. Okay, whatever you say, it's a go. There's no way I'm gonna say no to you. So of course I'll do my best.
Dr. Ben, who came in with a shirt that I couldn't afford because he's at a different level, but I came in with his shirt, which is, as you can see right here, this is the maroon shirt that Dr. Fontaine's partner and our brother in common of the Dominica Arts and Literary Association, founder, Dr. Ben, we give thanks for his idea of a line of clothing that speaks to that freedom struggle. So we want to thank you again. And I know Dr. Fontaine may want to say a few words. I'll step back. I apologize, Simone.
Anytime. Go ahead, Dr. Fontaine.
Yeah, no, this is exciting. And let me thank very much Dr. Alzino for joining us. It is really exciting. And it's certainly something. I mean, we share, that's the shared history that we have, I mean, they made it look like the Blacks were just pliant and just, no, everywhere we revolted, everywhere, we spoke loudly about our conditions, and I'm really happy that he's able to join us tonight and to be on this panel. And certainly there's yet a lot that we can explore with regards to just linking those communities. I mean, we are proud descendants, as is, of Negma, individuals who refused to be enslaved. And that is something to be proud of, certainly something to be proud of.
Yes, absolutely. And again, for anyone who tuned in late, we are here in celebration of Dr. Thomson's #1 bestseller, and he will tell us more about how he ascended to bestseller status so very quickly towards the end of the program. But we are here in celebration of his newly published book, The Maroons of Dominica, 1764 to 1818. So the next area I thought we would look at today, Dr. Fontaine, was just the major battles and what transpired and the numerous governors that it took in their attempts to squash the Maroon movement in Dominica. So you can start wherever you feel you would like to, just talking about the major battles. And I think Rosalie probably comes to mind immediately.
Yes, indeed. And I'm going to talk about this, but before I do, I want to talk very quickly to what was raised by Dr. Andre and also Dale and Gabe, that they made it appear as if slavery was ended when it was no longer profitable. That is far from the truth. I remember when the Maroon thing was heating up, and I'll talk about some of those battles in 17, when the real struggle started in 1784, 1785. The Planters Association in London, they wrote to the government saying that we actually need to station 25,000 of our military on Dominica to suppress them. And then the response, well, you know, Dominica is an island, 15 miles by 30 miles. If you need 30,000 to contain those Maroons in Dominica, where there are at the time about 15,000 slaves, what number are you going to need for Jamaica, where there is up to 300,000 slaves? So they realized that there was a mismatch in terms of what they could do to suppress, because the numbers was not working in their favor. 20,000 slaves in Jamaica and probably about 50,000 whites. They were outclassed, you know. So that idea that slavery was ended because they had no choice is not true. They were forced to do it, and they were forced to do so by the actions of the Maroons of Dominica. And one of those actions, it started actually in July of 1784. 1785, sorry, July of 1785, where guys like Farcel, Kongori, Bala, Mabuya, they all combined together to actually attack their states. So they started off in Layu, several of the states then in Layu, then Taru were attacked. What they would do is that at night they would burn everything that they could. They would burn the house where the slaves were staying, and they would take as much of the slaves with them as would want to come and take them back in the woods. And that way their numbers grew. So that by the time, 6 months later, by December of 1785, when Bala was ready to attack the Rosalie estate, there were 200 of them in Bala's camp. 200 Maroons ready for action in Bala's camp. And they descended on that day, December 6, 1785, to Rosalie, circled around Rosalie, encircled the estate, and then they launched their attack. And in that attack, the son of the second in command, Kongore of Bala, his son was killed in that attack. And that enraged him to the point that he personally killed the manager of Rosalie estate. He personally killed him in retaliation for the death of his son. And they despised the house slaves. So they talk about shooting shots or trying to shoot the house slaves. One of them was Katrina. And interestingly enough, this house slave, Katrina, she was the one who brought the news, whilst most of the other slaves on the Rosalie estate, because after he destroyed the entire estate, the 180, about 150 of the 180 slaves left with Bala. Among those who remained was Catherine, the house slave, who narrowly escaped death. She was the one who went to town to bring the story and explain exactly what transpired during that day in terms of the way they were able to burn it. And then they continued throughout 1785, 1786, they continued to attack. And that's why they call the period of the First Maroon War. It was the Maroons declaring war against the plantation system. And in the British press, they were saying that in Dominica, this war by the Maroons of Dominica, they call them runaways, it was bringing the colony to its knees. So that was the first major period. We had another very interesting period in 1791. It's called the New Year's Day Revolt in 1791. And during that time, that was led by Farcel. But in addition to Farcel, we had a gentleman by the name of Jean-Baptiste Pollinaire. Jean-Baptiste Pollinaire was a French mulatto. He was from Martinique, but he had left Martinique to come to Dominica. He was influenced by the French Revolution at the time. The French Revolution was ongoing, and that had inspired the slaves in Haiti to revolt. And then that had caused him now to actually decide that they were going to start basically liberate all of the slaves. The plan was this. The plan was very simple. They would kill all the whites on Dominica and liberate every single plantation. The idea that it would start on the southeast coast of Dominica, That is the estates of Bertrand, the estate of Sorrento, the Rosalie estate, and so on. They would start the attack there. Farcel, it was agreed Farcel would bring about 200 Maroons with their guns, and they would start the attack. They would liberate the slaves, and as they would just go across systematically through Dominica. So liberate the southeast plantations, then move across the interior to the other parts, Cassibruce, move across and so on, and free all the slaves. Unfortunately, for a reason that is, I think future historians need to find exactly what happened, Farcel did not show up. Farcel was a no-show. Farcel and another Maroon leader by the name of Pangloss, who was in charge of the Grand Bay area. Those two were supposed to bring in their forces, combine with those on the estate, along with the mulattoes who were prepared to help them. So it was a joint mulatto from Martinique and Maroon uprising. They started the uprising in 1791, around January 20th or so on. But by that time, because they did not have the strength of the Maroons to support them, and it just happened that there was at the time, Tumano was in port at the time in the Caprics, 2 British ships with a lot of sailors and soldiers. They were able to send reinforcements to the southeast and then crush the attack. They were able to crush the attack. So that is basically what transpired. So that was 1791. And then we have what was referred to as the Second Maroon War, which is another time of severe action and it happened when there was a new.
So if anyone would like to take that question, you can feel free to go ahead while we welcome Dr. Thomson back to the program. Dr. Fontaine, give us 1 minute.
You know, I think one of the things that we have to recognize is even today, some of the same excuses are made whenever, yes, you know, our people are murdered. Mm-hmm. You know, and I thought about that last night because I remember a part in the book where Thomson talks about when they formed the militia and who it consisted of, and yes, what was the point of the militia? Why did they create that? You know, to go chase down people who have escaped from, you know, a situation they didn't want to be in, so to speak. And so for me, your question, it just reminds me of everything that's happening today. The same excuses are being given. Essentially, it's your fault. You know, and then we have some people who are supposed to be part of our tribe or family repeating those same excuses. You know, so I think it's important that we not only read the book but recognize, you know, well, Dr. Andre brought out some points about a few books that have been written on the same subject by other writers. But I think the way Dr. Fontaine wrote his book, it brings it out in a different light, brings new perspective. It brings fresh eyes on the whole story. And so, you know, I can't stop telling him congratulations because it's so refreshing to read it from a different point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're going to go over to Dr. Dangleben, but Dr. Fontaine, the question that I presented in your absence was the contradiction that existed with just seeing how the Maroons were able to create strategic war plans as well as creating communities which showed their level of intellect. Yet there was still the idea that they were seen as no more than cattle. So we're just having a conversation on that particular topic. And I believe Dr. Dangleben would like to join in.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. You know, I think George is right. But like I said earlier, history repeats itself. And that is a strategy that has been used and continues to be used in different forms in terms of control of who we are. And in that, I really want to make my last point here in terms of what we have suffered post this physical slavery is the mental slavery part. And I think, you know, it was Gabriel Christian that said to the brother that we need to have this conference because I think we have failed in terms of the curriculum. So we can sit there and talk about the past. I want this book, this great book, to be time-stamped currently in curriculum. We went from GCE, I took GCE, to CXC, to CSEC, to all kinds of CC, this and that. But the curriculum did not change. So we have, this panel, to start from there, to take that and move towards changing the curriculum. So that is the impact. So we can expose to the children what really happened. So the question that you asked about the British, we need to expose people for who they are, right? Whether it was then or now, and make this part of the curriculum. This book is written differently, like George said, right? Thomson has the list of the slaves and the tables in the back and the references. This is a great book. And we can sit and we can talk about, you know, the slaves and the Collier uprising and all these things. That's great. But we need to put this in the curriculum so the next generation does not suffer that mental slavery that we did. This is how we change this. This is our time. That's all I had to say.
And one more comment before we go back to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Gabriel, you had a comment?
No, I just nodded my head.
Okay.
Let me just say something.
Yes, Mr. Gregor.
Yeah, you know, I just want to jump in here to endorse. And in fact, before you called on Dr. Dale Dangleman, I wanted to go to him because in fact, he said something which was remarkable. I mean, here we are, we're talking about the kind of tenacity, the kind of free-spiritedness. These people did not want to be slaves. They wanted to be free men. And so they fought for their freedom. So we never really dealt with the spirituality of these people and their psyche and who they were. I mean, really, when we thought about slaves, we never really thought these guys were princes and people of high esteem coming from the community. They were great leaders. Dr. Thomson Fontaine is bringing it to light here now. What it tells us is that we had that spirit at one time. Somewhere along the line, we lost it. If we go back to 1979, for example, somewhere along the line, we got some spirit and we did something in 79. And then, but now when you fast forward to what is happening now, you hear all kinds of things about police brutality and people dying in police custody, and hearing about people's human rights being breached and bus drivers in a peaceful demonstration being, violated and manhandled and beaten up. What happened to that spirit? So everything that is happening that we talk about, but you call a little demonstration, nobody turns up. What happened to that spirit? So I agree with Dr. Dale Dangleman. I believe that this book should find its way not only in the curriculum, in the schools, but at the UWI. And I really would like to challenge whoever is listening from UWI to think about those books. I mean, Andrew has written books, Christian has written books. This book should find their way into the library, in the curriculum at the University of the West Indies. And certainly we want to put out that challenge now. And then we talked about having this conference. I think it's a great idea. And people like the people at UWI should certainly be engaged to participate in that. So Simone, yeah, this is what I really wanted to say, because I think it's important for us to not just read the book. And I think the discussion here this afternoon is going to inspire many, many people to read that book.
Absolutely.
And I certainly hope it does. But I really want it to be more than just an inspiration, more than just a discussion. But I think people should start looking at it and bringing it to life. Because as the Dr. Dale Dangleman said, we need to be actually to live it through. You know, it's not a matter of having it in a book. We need to elevate that and flesh it out and put it in our daily lives. Right now, we hear all kinds of stories about cases in the courts and the political machinations and preventing cases from going to be heard by a magistrate. We people should not tolerate those things. I mean, we need to bring back that spirit and rise up when in fact we see things that are happening that are really not good. Thank you, Simone.
Yes, absolutely. I certainly agree with you. So, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, you wanted to jump back in terms of what you were discussing. And I think, this also brings to mind that some concepts that we believe are so new and current have existed for centuries, such as fake news and spinning stories, because I think that is something else we see a lot when the governors were trying to give the impression that the entire Maroon movement had been squashed, and they would send fake news back to Britain about when in actual, I mean, how many times did Facel die before he actually died? Let's just start with that. You're muted.
You're muted.
Yes, indeed, Simon, you make an excellent point, you know, the whole idea of that fake news syndrome, because they were saying, I mean, governor said, hey, they have been extinguished. As soon as they say the Maroon Revolt, the threat is over, then a spectacular attack, you know, takes place. And they say, well, you know, what is going on there? And we saw over the 50 years, I mean, there is this example of Jacko, you know, interestingly enough, when Jacko, who was one of the slave of the Maroons who lived the longest, because he spent more than 40 years in the forest, could never be found, could never be touched, more than 40 years. He came to Dominica as a young man, most likely in his early 20s, spent 40 years in the forest of Dominica. The day that he was killed, before he was killed, he on his own gunned down 2 of the soldiers who were trying to arrest them. When they wrote to England to report, they made no mention of the fact that Bala had taken, that Jacko had taken 2 of the soldiers down with him before he was killed. No mention was made of that. Yet this story came out afterwards. So this whole idea of trying to make it look like, you know, the Maroons were low level and so on, that was just not the case. But a very important thing happened. And it also showed the important role that the church played as well.
Yes.
There was a very important minister by the name of Reverend Charles, who was the rector of the Anglican Church in Dominica. And he had kept very careful notes of the treatment of the slaves. And also he was always preaching against the whites and against the planters. So I believe in 1799, he preached a very important sermon. He preached the sermon that talked about, masters, be kind to your servants. And he used that to say, you know, you guys come to church and you're there before me every Sunday. And here it is, the Bible says you need to be kind and good to your servants, yet you kill them. And he detailed the number of slaves who were killed by their masters simply for disobeying them. You know, there was this particular woman who was tied. She was beaten so badly. She was stripped naked and beaten. She died from her blows. And he detailed all of this. And he personally carried that to London to give to William Wilberforce as ammunition for him when he was making his case in the House of Commons in England. He personally carried it for him. So Wilberforce had all of this information from Dominica about the treatment that was given at the hands of the slave by somebody who could be trusted because he was a man of the cloth. And he had taken those very copious notes and so on and give all of that so that they could use those things. So, you know, it's something where we see, again, the whole idea to try to minimize the impact. But at the end of the day, it was too much. But one of the lessons that I learned, though, Simon, as well from this, and it's something that really haunts us today, is the fact that we don't trust each other, this sense of trust. The Maroons, there could still be Maroons living in Dominica today if it were not for their own brothers.
Absolutely.
Some of the slaves on the estate, they would pretend to be escaping just to find out where the Maroons were, and then come back and sell them out because they were offered their freedom. If they could lead them to the Maroons, they would offer them their freedom or offer them a little bit of money. And so that is how the whites began to make inroads, because up to that point, the British government was not prepared to send 20,000 white soldiers into Dominica. So they said the next best thing is to use their own against them. And we see that today in our society. Not
only that, Thomson, if I might chime in, but it got to the point where slaves were actually being recruited from Africa for the service of hunting the Maroons in Dominica. So there was a point in time where slaves would actually be taken from Africa for the sole purpose of coming to Dominica to hunt the Maroons, as well as the idea of rearing slaves in Dominica to go out into the forest to hunt the Maroons. So I think it's just barbaric, the approaches that these governors were willing to take to squash the entire Maroon movement in Dominica.
Yes, indeed. In fact, and I will just highlight one of the most dangerous one, and that was the one under the governorship of a guy by the name of Enslaved.
Yeah.
Governor Enslaved. Governor Enslaved came to Dominica at the beginning of 1812 with one thing on his mind: to completely destroy the Maroon population. So within days of him arriving in Dominica, he issued his first proclamation. He says, for all of you that are in the forest, you will be given certain amount of days. You have until, I think he said, you get them until March. You have basically 2 months to come back from the forest. If you come back, we will leave you. But if we have to come and get you, we will kill you if we find you. Of course, the slaves, the Maroons ignored him. He sent a trusty, what they call a trusty black slave, to take the message to them, to the Maroons. When the guy arrived, they said, why are you coming there with us? The Maroons issued a trial on the spot.
Yes, I remember.
Organized a trial with a chief judge.
Yes, yes.
They organized a trial with a chief judge and said they're going to put this trusty slave on trial for trying to betray them, thinking that they would, that they could use the black against them. He was found guilty. They killed him on the spot. That was the kind of resistance that they should. So this guy came with this notion to kill them. Later on, when he realized that it was not working, he became worse. And that is where he made a big mistake, because he passed a proclamation that says that he would bayonet men, women, and children. He said, irrespective of age, once you are caught, you'll be bayoneted. And that is the one that actually caught the attention of the British public. So when it was reported in the British newspapers that a governor on the island of Dominica had threatened to put to death men, women, and children, one newspaper actually apologized to the public. It says, basically, I'll paraphrase now, we are better than this as British citizens, that this is what you have to resort to. And by the way, these are people that they're saying were no threat. Yet you're prepared to put to death men, women, and children because you find no other way of controlling them. At the end of the day, several of them were killed, scores of them were killed, and that is where we have this list that was generated at the end of the book, because later on the British Parliament demanded that Ainsley account for every single person that was either arrested or killed or whatever punishment was meted out for them. And that's where we get the information, for example, of Savre. And the number of persons that he killed and so on. So that was the length to which this particular governor was prepared to go. And at the end of the day, they claimed, again, even after this tremendous attack on the Maroons, what he did, for example, he had Maroon trials on the martial law. He declared martial law. Yes. So they would, once they captured the Maroons, they would try them in the morning, sentence them to death, and then himself would sign up by 4 o'clock. He wants this particular act completed, execution. They would execute them right there on the market square. But he went beyond that. He said, after you kill them, cut off their heads, and stick their heads on poles, and burn their bodies on the beach. In other words, just get rid of these people. You don't want to see them. You don't want to have anything with them. The worst, the most barbaric, the most heinous type of treatment for all. And that's the kind of suffering that our ancestors endured. Why did they have to go for that? Simply because they desired to be free. Simply because they resisted slavery. They refused to be enslaved. And at the end, the punishment was death. Some of them horrific deaths. And women, the number of women who were harmed. Rachel, and I remember some of the names like Rachel and Zabet. And there was this old lady who they said, practiced opium. They call her Vino. Her name was Vino, like old no. She was I believe she was in her 60s. she was harmed simply because she decided to be free. So, that kind of tremendous sacrifice that all ancestors paid or went through is something that as Dominicans, we all should be very, very proud of.
Yes, and what I want to visit as well is what we talked about a little while ago in terms of where do we go with this information. But it is now 4:25, and as we promised, the lines at Q95 will be available for anyone who wants to call in. And I think I have the numbers here, 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-425. I think that number is incorrect. Lofty, could you give us the numbers for Q95 so anyone can come in, starting with the 616 number? Ooh, we cannot hear you.
The numbers are you hearing me now?
Yes, thank you.
The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097. The digital number, it is 616-4257. And those of you overseas, your number 305-432-9624.
Okay, we got it. And while we await your calls, and I'm also going to go ahead and grab the comments from Facebook as well. But in the meantime, I'm sorry?
I was just alerting you that we have a number of calls already making their way.
Oh, sure. Well, let's go ahead and take it. And for the panel, just keep in mind that one of our final questions as you form your opinions is the Maroon spirit that we once experienced in Dominica, is that spirit dead? So that is the question that I want us to ponder on while we take some questions from the Q95 station for Dr. Thomson Fontaine. So Lofty, take it away.
Yes, caller, good afternoon. Go right on your own.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Thomson. Good afternoon to the panel.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let me first congratulate Thomson, Dr. Fontaine, on this book. I think we need more of those kind of writings to chronicle our history. And I think it's really going to make a good impact in the whole literature aspect, adding to what Gabriel Christian and all the others and Dr. Andrew has done. I would encourage as much of everybody to get a copy of this book. And I haven't read it yet. I've ordered it, but I'm looking forward to reading it. But I just have a few questions, but I just want to quickly put some things in perspective based on what I've heard. Thomson, the cover pick, I just wanted you to probably give us a genesis of that, because I have this, I saw it and I have a picture of it which I use now and then in particular circumstances or events, but I never know the genesis of the cover pick, which is well chosen. In terms of I just want to quickly say that the legal framework is important of the whole slave trade. That is what ensured that the slave within that property. And to me, that was like a factor that when we got partial or incomplete emancipation, that the slave owners got compensated, because from the legal aspect, so all the legal, religious, and other aspects were put in place to support the whole system of slavery. I would want to quickly say also that right now we are in the stage what we call reparations, and I think that is we can get this via the panel. I think that is the part of the struggle that will culminate and give credence to all the struggle that the Maroons have gone through over the years. I'm Dr. Damian Dublin. I'm chairman of the Dominican Reparations Committee, and I tell you, we are pushing for a lot of things to make that nexus. We're calling for Black history in the schools. We're calling for a naming and renaming, naming after our local, regional, and international heroes, and renaming of certain names that have links to colonial past. We're calling for a renaming project. We also think that the Barracoon building and the old Maquinita places of interest need to be restored to the original value, so people can understand how the history is. So So quickly, I would want to make some suggestion. One, what do the panel think of the question of, I think right now we have to look at terminology change. This question of slaves, I would want to say that we, instead of using slaves, we could start to think of the terminology of enslaved Africans. Because as was mentioned earlier by, I think, Dr. Danguben and some others, when these guys were captured, there were chiefs and chieftains and son of chieftains in Africa. So they came on a level. That's why some of them decide, I'm not going to be in that. And from the early days, as some to mention, some of them escaped too. So that's important. The history of Africa before slavery that made them so proud and organized that they were able to come here and organize their society even while in the camps. So that is just an idea I'm throwing forward. So, but I think the focus now is on reparation, but I just wanted some answer to this question. I really need to congratulate you. One quick question in adding, what degree of collaboration, Thomson, you had with Dr. Honeychurch? Because Dr. Honeychurch has this book, Fighting Maroons, which have a lot of information in relation to the Maroons too. So I just wanted to find out what level of collaboration and the cover pick. But I think it's a good book, and I'm really looking forward to diving into it too. So all the best.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, caller. Let's take another call. This line, caller, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Duran panel. I
Good
called to
afternoon.
ask, where can we find the book? Which bookstore we can get it, and how much? What is the price of a book? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's take this line, caller, good afternoon. Go right on over this line.
Good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon.
Caller, can you please turn off your listening device, please? It's creating some unnecessary feedback.
Yes, good afternoon to Duran.
Yes, good afternoon, sir.
Yes, good afternoon. Let me want to thank Thomson for his very good production. I'm very happy to have started reading the book. I'm a descendant of Kwashi, and we have a lot of local stories that we learned from our parents on Kwashi. And the camp of Kwashi is still owned by our family. So I'm very happy to read the book and get some more information on it. So thank you and good afternoon.
All right, thank you and good afternoon. Another call here, local line, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Let me congratulate Thomson and also his illustrious panel on a job well done. I'd just like to probably let him make some comments on the relationship between the Kalinago at the time and the Africans. Because I remember growing up in the 70s, and so people had that type of thing of looking down on the Kalinago, and there were types of names that probably we grew up thinking that there was always that kind of hostility between the Kalinago people and the Africans. But in reading some documents, you realize that the Africans and the Kalinago actually joined forces to fight against the colonial masters. So even in present day, there are things that both Kalinago and African people in Dominica need to collaborate their efforts to continue to fight for what is right and what is just in the society. I don't know if you probably can comment on that.
All right, thank you. Simone, there are other callers coming, but I will yield to whatever you guys.
Yeah, so let's let Dr. Fontaine take a couple of the questions before we continue.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot. And let me start by thanking Dr. Dublin for this intervention. Indeed, he had some questions. The cover page that's the work of Mr. Giptus John, who is a member of the DALA organization and a well-known Dominican writer, and who also does this photography as well. And I owe the cover of this book to Mr. Giptus John, and he's justly given his credit as well in the book. I'm very happy to hear of plans to rename some of these areas. I think this is an excellent idea. I mean, we grew up on Kennedy Avenue. We don't have a Ballard Lane or, or Facel or Pangloss or Kwashi. I mean, you know, we need to have those names embedded in our minds. These are our heroes, these are our ancestors. So it's good to know that this move is afoot in Dominica. With regards to collaboration with Dr. Honeychurch, although I did not speak to Dr. Honeychurch directly, but I was able to use his work. And as in terms of the work that he has done, I quoted him extensively in the book in terms of his research that I was able to rely on as well. So in writing this book, I did make good use of the work of Dr. Honeychurch, as I indicated at the start of the program. So although we did not speak about the project, but his work nonetheless provided a lot of guidance as I went through. The question on whether the book is not yet available in Dominica. We are working on getting books to the bookstores in Dominica. That will most likely happen very early in May. We are working on doing that, and we'll have announcements as soon as this happens. But if in the meantime, you can order a book on Amazon.com, or if you want it sent to you directly, you can send an email to maroonsofdominica@gmail.com. The question about the Kalinago and the African connection, this actually is brought out in the book, because at the very beginning, even before the what we call the formal trade in slaves started, Dominica was home to Black people, and these were usually slaves who had escaped from other areas, from other countries. So you have slaves who had escaped, say, from Barbados, from St. Kitts, who would come to Dominica, and they would be given shelter by the Kalinagos of Dominica. So by the time the African trade started in earnest in Dominica, you already had a number of escaped slaves who were living in fact, they were the ones who started the first communities, and they did so with the help of the Kalinago Indians. So the Kalinagos played a very critical and important role in helping to set up those communities by the time they were set up by the Caribs. And of course, it's really great to hear about Kwashi. Kwashi is also featured in the book. Kwashi is one of those leaders that his death was announced how many times. They said, oh, Kwashi was killed and thing, but eventually he was, he was caught and he was beheaded, and his head was placed on the pole. So he paid the ultimate price. But it's great to see that his ancestors continue to honor him. And we need to see a lot more of that in Dominica.
I guess we can take some more phone calls, Lofty.
Some more calls, absolutely.
Let's go to the overseas line. Caller, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon, Lofty, the trucker right here.
Yes, sir.
And I want to say a special good afternoon to all those on the panel, and special good afternoon to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. I listen, and what the book, describe what the book is saying, and he wrote. It's a beautiful initiation, and I appreciate that. Talking about our plight in the Caribbean. But after the book, Doc, I know you have the knowledge after this book to come with another book. But my advice, come with the greatness of the Blacks before slavery. Because there's an agenda to keep us where we are. Who controls our school curriculum? It's Europe. Who controls whatever our belief system, religion? They do. So we have to get back into self and kind. But are the young people ready for this? They are the next generation. They have to be ready. So you have to write a book so that they could love it, because that is our history. Because listen to the music of our children right now. It tells you their level of intelligence on what they write. Prior to Dominica in the past, Groovers, Exile One, Gramax, Black Affairs, and the group our brother Angelo was in, listen to their lyrics. They talk about the black man struggle and the black man awareness. But look at our young generation right now, the lyrics they write. Nothing but alcohol and all other stuff that have nothing to do with our culture. So we have to introduce that to them. And like my teacher said, we have to give the Caucasian race back everything they give us. Because we wasn't religious people, we were spiritual beings. They gave us religion. We were the ones that taught them about supreme mathematics, a study of astronomy, astrology, medicine, thanks to our great doctor, Dr. Dale and the others. because that's in them genetically from our ancestors. So they're going to be carrying that legacy. So our young generation have to want it, because we are not different from the past. We are extension of the past. So our young generation have to know the greatness, the dynasty that our people had decades and decades ago. Because we are not in 2021. The planet is millions of years old. So we got to get out of his history and get to know about our history, the black man, and the knowledge is here. Thank you again, Dr. Fontaine. And you're in Africa, and I know you're getting a lot of knowledge being in Africa. You take care, and peace and blessing. And I'm looking forward to get one of the books with your signature in it. Have a blessed day.
Yeah, so Lofty, let's take one more call and then we'll jump over to Facebook to take some comments. Dr. Fontaine, did you want to make a comment?
I could, if there are calls, then probably can take some more calls and then I'll comment, yes.
Okay, there are no calls coming in as yet, but Dr. Fontaine, let me just take that opportunity as well to at least seize the opportunity whilst I have the time here to basically congratulate.
You need to turn on your mic, Lofty.
Yeah, he's a little low.
Let me just take that opportunity as well.
We can't hear you.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I was saying it would be remiss of me just to sit behind the consoles and not congratulate Dr. Thomson Fontaine on his latest edition as well. I want to just kind of springboard my comment from a comment that Mr. G made and Dr. Dangleben made as well, in that what I got from their points were basically making that book, Dr. Fontaine, applicable to our everyday living. And I am a person who lives in reality, in the reality that is. And I haven't read the book as yet, but based on what I'm hearing thus far, I can well understand some of the fighting spirits of our ancestors, what they did. And so I would want us now, after having discussed the goodies, as it were, in that book, if some Dominicans can come around the table and see it fit to be the implementers of what that book is saying or recommending as to a better way of life, the freedom that we all yearn for in Dominica, let us try to see if some of us can be implementers of the very many points that you made in that book. And so to me, that would be much more in terms of the applying of the writings. I believe if we can come across by getting some persons in Dominica to push the idea of implementing those situations, then I think that discussion today and the book itself would have been doing us a whole lot of good. That's my comment.
Dr. Fontaine?
Yes, no, indeed. I am fully on board with that comment from Lofty, and it's something I believe that we need to really push for. What I would really like to see, though, in addition to that, is to see our young people embracing the history. I mean, I'm an old man now, and that's what I'm finding about my history. That should not be the same for the younger generation. I think the younger generation should learn. I mean, you know, we spent time. I was a history teacher at SMA, but I taught the history of Russia. I taught Dr. Dangleben about Rasputin and the great Tsar of Russia, not about the great Bal of Dominica, you know. So yeah, there is a mismatch within our education system, and we really must find a way to really have these types of, our children should go to school and learn about this, because infused in the story of the Maroons is the history of Dominica. When you read the book, you get the history of a 60-year period of Dominica, a full history of Dominica. So I think our children in Dominica, this younger generation, they need to learn. Those books need to be in the public domain within the school system, that the children can learn about the history.
Yes, absolutely. And again, before we go to our final question for the panel, whether or not you think that the Negma War spirit is dead, we just want to make sure that we acknowledge the great discussion that has been going on Facebook. A lot of congratulations coming for you, Dr. Fontaine. So I hope that you'll take some time once we're done to sort of acknowledge everyone who joined us on the line. And we also had a lot of people share that the book is available on Amazon. So you can simply go to Amazon.com to place your order. You can look it up via Dr. Fontaine's name. It's an easy way to pull it up if you would like to place an order. And then we have some interesting questions coming in as well. We have Viva Mamo who says, Dr. Thomson Fontaine initiate discussion with the Ministry of Education in Dominica to have this book be a part of the curriculum at every high school. Have you initiated such discussion? If so, what has been the reaction by our officials at the Ministry of Education or school administrators?
No, the question to that is no, I have not had any discussions up to now with the school administration in Dominica, but that is certainly a direction to which I'm headed.
Yes, absolutely. So again, a lot of great comments. Someone wanted to chime in?
Yes, if I may interject. I'm just going to inject a dose of reality in our discussions today with respect to the availability of the book and its use in our education systems. The author of the book, as far as I know, is the subject of an arrest warrant in Dominica. So the question is, are you suggesting that the very authorities who have the responsibility of charging Dr. Fontaine with what legally can only be described as a bogus charge will take the initiative and introduce this book in the schools? The repatriation we should be talking about is to repatriating our history. That is what we should be talking about, not prosecuting those who would seek to enlighten us about our history, but repatriating our history. So that's the dose of reality I wish to inject into this discussion as to the availability of the book in terms of our educational institutions.
Simone, can I just say?
Yes, please do.
Yes, I wanted to interject this because Dr. Andre just made that comment. And then because, of course, Dr. Fontaine also said that he has not yet had any discussion with the education ministry. I want to just revert back to my very good friend, Dr. Damian Dublin. And I want to take him up on that. And I really wish I hope he's committed to the statement that he made. He did, in fact, say that he had started discussions with the schools about putting this thing in their curriculum and teaching Black history. I would like to challenge Dr. Damian Dublin, who's a very good friend of mine. Dr. Damian Dublin, I know you're listening. You really should get in touch with us, myself, Dr. Fontaine, anybody here. Let us discuss the real question of you taking that initiative to go to the Ministry of Education and ensure that that thing gets into the curriculum. And also to speak with the people at UWI Open Campus and see what can be done to get UE to take it up. You're a man of great influence. I know that because you're a friend of mine. I can speak for you. And so I hope that you will be okay if we contact you to have further discussion, because I think it's very, very important to get this into the school's curriculum, because as you can see, Dr. Andre has alerted us that Dr. Fontaine may not be able to do that because he's a wanted man.
Well, since Dr. Andre spoke and Mr. G spoke, I might as well say that Mr. Dublin is my very good friend. And I'm very, very pleased that he was able to be a runaway slave, or well, he was able to escape the strictures of the current conditions on the country, because I thought long and hard, and I almost called Thomson about the warrant, because it occurred to me before this meeting that Thomson is actually himself a runaway of a kind. I mean, we can laugh about it, but I mean, Judge Andre was very frank about it. And so when I heard Brother Dublin's voice, it means that we're going through a certain awakening, because I know it took a lot of courage for Brother Dublin to associate with this event here this afternoon. And maybe, just maybe, Brother Dale is a medical doctor. He knows about a lot about the mind and the mind-body connection. We are seeing a synapse. Is it correct, doctor, that in the brain there is this catalytic development that allows the mind to trigger the limbs to move in a particular direction. You know the gross anatomy of the human being, you can deal with that. But I'm very happy that this afternoon may really represent an awakening of sorts, that Dr. Damian Dublin came in, and Brother G has basically made the point. Brother G, well done. If there's anybody, he's an ambassador, by the way. He's not just simply a dentist. So using his diplomatic skills, he's maybe going to be able to find a way to get that warrant stricken, because I'm not trying to say he should interfere with the courts, but use his influence so we can begin to see a certain movement in Dominica towards what is reasoned judgment and not what is ridiculous, because it's really ridiculous, because the charges are bogus, all of them are. And I want to just, before I conclude, just associate with Dr. Dublin. I want to support him on the language. Language is powerful. In 1992, when we did In Search of Eden, Dr. Andrea and I, he wasn't a doctor then, he was a Crown attorney, had to engage the issue of, should we see African slaves? And we decided to say enslaved Africans. If I capture someone and put them to work, that is not your natural condition, you see. I have put you in that condition by force of arms. So you're enslaved. So let us always, when we speak, our folks in the diaspora were enslaved. That is, we were forced into slavery. That was never our natural condition, and our spirit was always oriented towards freedom. Thank you very much again, Dr.
Yeah,
Dublin.
absolutely. I think Dr. Dangaban wants to chime in.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I do not know Dr. Dublin for whatever it's worth, but I think before we wrap here, I want to emphasize what I heard from Gabriel Christian talking to the brother from Argentina. I think this book goes beyond Dominica, okay? I have Dr. Winbush, who's a friend of mine, his book here on reparations. I think this goes side by side. I think we need to call to that conference and show the Caribbean. We need to stop having these conferences and not following up, and put things into action so we can keep moving. This book, I've skimmed through it. It's bigger than Dominica. And we need to start somewhere. Yes, we understand what has happened to Dr. Fontaine in Dominica. Bogus, 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 bogus. But the likes of Dr. Dublin, who many of you guys say you're friends with, are part of a system of oppression. And I speak forcefully every week on that oppression of our people, including myself and Dr. Fontaine. So I refuse to break bread with anyone who chooses to oppress and suppress any one of us, unless that is the synapse and the axon that sparks that change. But I think I am calling on to emphasize what Christian said, on let's get to that conference. Let's get to that Maroon conference, whether it's in St. Vincent, and by the way, the term is Garifuna. Okay, Chatouye is an example of that in St. Vincent, Black and Kalinago. So let's celebrate that. And hopefully the Dominican minds will follow. But we have to set the example. That's what I had to say.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm informed that we have a couple of callers who are on the line, but let's just take one more comment from Facebook before we invite them in. I have caller Astefan, who is reiterating a lot of what has been said already. She says, I am the chair of the St. Kitts Nevis Reparation Committee, and I support Damien's call for change in the terminology from slaves to enslaved. Africans were taken and put into slavery. So I just thought that was a great comment. So Lofty, you can chime in with the rest of the callers before we wrap up for the day.
All right, let's see if we can take up a calls. This one, the overseas line. Call it right on.
Hey, good evening. This is Finn in Washington. Thompson, what can I say, man? I think everybody has really said what I wanted to say. So it just, as you were talking, it just brought me back to that boxing plant that you and I were working back in the mid-70s as high school students in Rosalie. But anyway, the question I wanted to ask, and of course, congratulations in order. You know, the history books tell us two things. You mentioned Wilberforce, that the slavery was abolished in Dominica and in the British Caribbean because of the actions of Wilberforce, right? William Wilberforce. And then also, it goes on to say that slavery was abolished also because the British plantocracy felt that the estate system in the Caribbean was no longer profitable. It also goes on to say that in France, Napoleon could also make sugar from sweet potatoes. So they felt that the British and the French, and I guess others, were spending too much money in the Caribbean, and so the returns were not profitable. So I just like you to talk about this, because obviously, I know the books were written in Oxford and London, not in Cambridge. So, but still, I thought we need to juxtapose that with your brilliant piece of research here.
All right, thank you very much, caller. Let's do this line. Caller, good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, this is Richard. I just wanted to connect with my compadre Thomson and my other friends online, including Gabu, and wanted to say Thomson, fantabulous, viva. We go a long ways, and I have ordered mine. It's going to my other home, and I'll probably getting one here in Dominica as soon as it's available. But looking forward to see you on the ground, comrades. Let's do what we got to do. Viva again.
Yeah, so I think we have time for maybe one more call, Lofty, before we wrap it up for the evening.
Yes, let me give the local line the priority. Caller, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm calling from Antigua. I learned so much this afternoon. I wish the schools would teach our young people a lot of those histories. You hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. We're hearing you loud and clear.
Yes.
Yes.
And I want to know if there's any detailed history or information in the book about Rodney's Rock, and if the Maroons of Dominica had any part to play in it. Because I remember when I was young in Antigua, we used to go to Rodney's Rock. I think it's like a cave line. So I want to know the history behind it.
All right, thank you.
And yes, and continue the good work.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so we have about 3 minutes. So I want to use this opportunity, and of course, I think we can all see that the Negma War spirit is in fact alive, and we have a wonderful opportunity at this point to maybe put that conference together and to keep the conversation going, because I agree with everyone who have said it is not just about reading the book, but really how do we live the experience of the Negma War so they remain a part of who we are. So in the 2 minutes that we have left for the program, and again, thank you everyone who chimed in. I just want to give everyone about 10-15 seconds to wrap up with their final thoughts for today.
Let me just
Sam?
Let me just say, first of all, thank you to TDN Radio and TDN TV listeners and viewers for tuning into this program. Of course, Dr. Fontaine, thank you for inviting me to the panel. You know, I want to reiterate something that Dr. Dangleben said earlier, which is, you know, our curriculums in our schools in Dominica, in the Caribbean, wherever, need to reflect us. It needs to, you know, not be so Eurocentric. Of course, that is important. We have to know that history as well, but we also need to know our history. And so, you know, again, you know, we have to keep that spirit alive, keep the Maroon spirit alive. And Simon, to your question, I don't believe it's dead. I believe for now, in some places, it's just maybe dormant, maybe sleeping a little bit. So hopefully the Maroons of Dominica can remind us of who we are and where we came from.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sam. Anyone else with some final thoughts before we wrap up?
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to jump in and say, you know what? For many years, I went searching for myself and couldn't find myself. And recently, in the last 3 to 5 years, I found myself in my ancestry. I found spirituality. I found something different that I was taught in Dominica. And I think the work of Dr. Fontaine sort of just brings all this back to light, that's what we need to teach the children. And like he said, I found it at a very late age. I'm in my 50s now. But you know what? I am more enlightened and more empowered now than I have ever been because I found my ancestry. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. G, would you like to make a contribution before we wrap up?
Yeah, very quickly, Simone. 3 things really, very quickly. One is that certainly one of the things we hope will come out of this is that the schools will put this in the curriculum and UWI will take it on. And secondly, I certainly hope that this bogus charges against Dr. Fontaine will be dropped. And I hope Dr. Dublin can help us put that in the minds of the people who are supposed to do that, because it's a waste of time having that kind of talent. This man who loves his country so much, he carries his country, in his heart, or wherever he goes. And you're telling me this man cannot come back to his country because you have a bogus charge? I just think it is pathetic. It's nonsensical. And I really wish with all the everything we can to just get rid of that. I mean, if the powers that be are listening, just guys, get rid of this thing. Free the man from this nonsense. Let him help to develop his country. Thank you, Simone.
Absolutely. Dr. Vaz, final words?
Thank you, Dr. Fontaine. Thank you, everybody. I actually just ordered the book on Amazon, so hope to read it as soon as possible. And I also hope to collaborate with you on a textbook, possibly, something like that in the future.
Oh, wonderful. Mr. Christian?
Well, I just want to say that I'm very moved. I have a book. I was hoping to get it here to show it. It's about 40-some years, 41 years old. That's the book that the Cuban Revolution gave me in 1978. And I was going through it several years ago, and as I paged through it, I found the executive of the National Union of Students. The president was a guy called Jefferson Lloyd, other known as Zed, a mathematician in New York City. And the treasurer was the one and only Thomson Fontaine. Thomson must have been about 14 years old then. So Thomson, you've continued that mission. You've not abandoned that mission. The evidence is there. And I joined Brother G, and I didn't want to be controversial. I mean, Dr. Matthew is a person in high society. I didn't want to offend her by saying what I said about striking that warrant, but I mean it. I mean it. We have to get our people together. Everybody has to get on board. See, Zion train is moving out of the station, and this train is bound for Zion. This train carries no backsliders. This train carries no backbiters. This is a serious matter upon which we are embarked. It's not a trifling matter. We're here talking about our very existence as a people. We can see what's happening in the world. And Dominica, small though we may be, we know the history of Dominica. And that's what this book really basically says. We may be people from small islands like Jamaica or Grenada, but here we have Dr. Vaz. And today we also had Professor Caicedo from the Palenque. And basically, as Dr. Dale has accepted, and I think Simone will endorse, we have to move to conference. We have to move to get the books in the schools. We have to move to strike the warrants. We have to get together, and we have to board that train and then head to our freedom.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Andre, final words?
Yes, let me thank Dr. Fontaine for inviting me to be part of this wonderful panel, this wonderful discussion, this meeting of the minds, this discussion about a book. In fact, I was interviewed a few weeks ago by someone writing a piece on the Rosie Douglas book, and they asked me, am I not discouraged by the truism that if you want to hide a book from Dominicans or West Indians, you just shove it in a book. If you want to hide something, you shove it in a book. And I said, no, because it seems to me that over the decades, over the years we've been writing, we've been fortified and energized by the fact that persons increasingly are resorting to some of these books. This book of Dr. Fontaine is a virtual coming home. It's a journey back home. So as this book hopefully is welcomed by Dominicans, let me hope also publicly that other Dominicans, both literally and spiritually, are welcome back home to make their contribution. I don't know if Dale, there's a Dale, I can't remember his last name, I don't know if he's here. There's a Pan-Africanist, Dr. I.P. Pascal. I don't know if he's involved in the Reparations Committee. There's this eloquent speaker, historian Bernard Wiltshire. Again, I don't know if he's involved in the Reparations Committee. And if not, why not? But let us build a broad tent where those who can make a significant contribution are welcomed, irrespective of whether they were able to purchase a passport. Let us welcome those of us, of those wonderful folks on your panel, present company accepted, well, present speaker, obviously, to make their contribution towards making the island and the region a better place. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. And the final words goes to the man of the hour, Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Your final words, please.
Wow, Simon, what can I say? Thanks to you, thanks to the panel, thanks to the callers, thanks to the many scores of persons who are with us on Facebook, and also to the many, many people who bought the book already. You see, by virtue of their buying the book, it meant that for the past 2 weeks, I've been on Amazon for exactly 2 weeks, and for that time, I've been, the best-selling book for Latin America and the Caribbean. So that means I've trumped books from Mexicans, from Peru, from all the Latin American countries, and that itself is a feat, and it goes to show the interest that is there. I checked today, and I've been eased down to number 3, but that's okay. I'm sure that after this program, a lot more people will in fact get their copy. But I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone for the encouragement and also for the lessons. I think, we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn from our ancestors. And the more we learn of our ancestors, the more we learn about ourselves. The more we take time to understand what they went through, what they suffered, what they did, is the better we behave in this time. And so I'd really like to urge all of us in Dominica to continue to be good to ourselves, to be good to each other, and to continue to trust each other and work together. We have a lot of work to do in terms of building Dominica and moving the country forward. And just understanding the work of the Maroons, I think, will help us. That sense, that spirit that they exuded. And you don't get a chance to talk about their spirituality that's in the book, what they refer to as obia. It is very much in the book. I did not get a chance to talk about it, but it is there. It is something that propelled them. Somebody asked about the ancestors of some of these great leaders. I can tell you that Bala had children. I can tell you that one of his sons, in fact, was taken to England by the Governor Odd. Governor Odd, who was responsible for his demise, actually raised his son as his own in government house, and then he took him to England, and the trail runs cold after that. We don't know what happened to him. It very well could be that Bala's son grew up in England and had a family of his own, had descendants in England. That's a real possibility. So yeah, there's a lot to love about the history of Dominica, and I'm really excited to have done just a little piece. There is so much more to learn and to find out. And thanks again to all of you for being so kind with all of your words of support and encouragement. Much blessings. And thanks again, Simon, for an excellent task of bringing all of this together.
Yes, thank you so much. And again, it was wonderful being the host of this program. Thank you, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, for inviting me to be a part of this historic moment. And of course, we have a lot more to discuss. So I look forward to our continuing conversations on this particular topic. And again, we want to thank everyone who joined us via Facebook, via TDN TV, Q95 FM, and wherever you were able to tune in. We thank you for your contribution and we wish you good evening. Again, my name is Simone Matthew, and it was an honor to be a part of this program. So everyone, you have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Congrats, Thomson. And thank you, Simone.
Thanks. Congrats,
Thank
Thomson.
you. All right.
God bless. God bless.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.